Shall we start? Good morning, everyone. On behalf of OVE, the Office of Evaluation of the Inter-American Development Bank, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our first webinar during the Global Evaluation Week 2023. Thank you for joining OVE's event on development effectiveness. Special thanks to our panelists and to the OVE team who organized this webinar. In fact, development effectiveness holds great significance for the entire development community. It refers to ensuring that our interventions consistently achieve their intended development objectives. So it's in fact at the very core of our existence as a development institution. At the Inter-American Development Bank, we have what we call a development effectiveness framework. It defines a set of standards, tools, and practices that are integrated throughout the entire life cycle of our interventions. The framework aims at ensuring the quality of interventions right from the outset, as well as monitoring during execution and evaluating their performance at completion. This framework was adopted at IDB 15 years ago. It really has transformed the way we approach and work on projects. Significant advances have made in ensuring that projects are equipped with result frameworks, incorporating monitoring of output delivery, and establishing a robust system for evaluating project outcomes at the end using an objectives-based methodology. However, challenges persist and renewed efforts are needed to promote a culture that focuses on achieving the development results. IDB's newly appointed president, Ilan Goldfarb, has put development effectiveness front and center on his agenda, and today's event hopes to contribute to this important conversation. Through the exchange of knowledge from various institutions, we aim at identifying successful and unsuccessful experiences and explore the way ahead in enhancing development effectiveness. So thank you again to everyone. And I leave you now with our moderator, Claudia Figueroa. The floor is yours, Claudia.
Thank you, Ivory, for that insightful introduction and for reminding us that development effectiveness lies at the core of our work. Ultimately, our aim is to deliver tangible results on the ground, and our institutions have dedicated considerable efforts to enhance those outcomes. Welcome, everybody, to present and future perspectives of development effectiveness, strategies for impactful change. Before we start, let me go over some logistics. Remember to mute your microphone, please. You can write your questions in the chat, and we are having live interpretation to Spanish and Portuguese. You can use the world icon to find the interpretation of your preference. I am honored to have the opportunity to facilitate this dialogue on such an important topic for the development community. We have a distinguished panel of experts who bring perspectives from international financial institutions and the International Agenda on Development Effectiveness. Please allow me to introduce each of our panelists. Rachel Calleja is a research fellow in the Center for Global Development's UK and European Development Leadership Program. Her research focuses primarily on issues of aid effectiveness, innovative aid modalities, and the strategy, management, and organization of bilateral development agencies. Welcome, Rachel. Gabriele Fattorelli is the director of the Corporate and Thematic Division of the Independent Evaluation Department of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD. He is responsible for a wide range of strategic and line management projects in close collaboration with EBRD's board and management. Welcome, Gabriele. Rasmus Hallberg is a lead evaluation specialist at the Independent Evaluation Group of the World Bank Group. He has led complex evaluations of the World Bank's work on data for development, global convening power, the World Bank operating model, and the role of self-evaluation and M&E, among many others. Welcome, Rasmus. Cesar Bullón is an economist principal specialist at the Office of Evaluation and Oversight of the IDB and my colleague. Cesar leads OVE's cluster on thematic and sector evaluations and has led complex corporate, thematic, and country program evaluations, including the review of the IDB's knowledge generation and dissemination. Welcome, Cesar. With no further ado, let's start with our first question. Based on your experience, what has been achieved thus far with development effectiveness systems? Why don't we start with you, Rachel, bringing the perspective from the CGD and of the International Agenda on Development Effectiveness. Rachel, what has been achieved thus far?
Great, thank you so much, Claudia. And let me start by saying a really big thank you to colleagues at the IDB for hosting this event and for inviting me to participate. I'm really delighted to be here and looking forward to the conversation. So what has been achieved so far on development effectiveness? Well, from my perspective, the biggest achievement so far is the fact that we have a common set of principles for defining effective development action. As I'm sure we all know, these principles were agreed as part of the 2011 Busan Agreement, which brought together for the first time a broad range of development actors, including non-DAC providers, civil society, and the private sector, as part of a consensus on development best practice. But perhaps what's more important than the Busan Agreement itself is that there's evidence that the effectiveness principles continue to be relevant standards of best practice today, more than a decade after they were initially agreed. So last year, we at CGD published a paper based on a survey of officials from a range of development agencies that sought to understand the continued relevance of the effectiveness agenda and what, if anything, might need to change to ensure it remains fit for purpose in a changing development landscape. So as part of this exercise, we asked respondents directly whether they thought the Busan principles remained relevant for considering best practice in development effectiveness. Our results showed that 85% of survey respondents said yes, the principles were still relevant from their perspectives. We also ran this survey with a smaller sample of officials from recipient countries, all of which also agreed that the current effectiveness principles remain relevant. When we asked respondents to explain their answers, most agreed that the effectiveness principles are built on years of learning and experience and broadly continue to reflect best practice. So this isn't to say that there aren't challenges or changes that might be needed in the future, but the consensus that the international community has managed to achieve around the principles of effective cooperation and the fact that these principles have endured is, in my mind, a really key achievement so far. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for highlighting the set of principles on effectiveness and how they remain relevant even after all these years. Gabriele, what can you tell us about what has been achieved thus far from the EBRD's perspective?
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here to discuss about development effectiveness, which actually is a very timely discussion for the EBRD. Over the last 2 years, we are working on rethinking our development effectiveness framework. And just to put the things in a perspective, EBRD is very much a private sector focused institution, and we interpret development effectiveness through this lens of a private sector company. And it is focused very much on transition, in fostering transition towards open market economies and to promote the private sector rather than on the SDGs or poverty reduction. And that is reflected very much also in the way that we try to measure that, not very much focus on the what, but on the how this transition happens. So coming to your question, let me mention 3 things that I believe this framework was successful about. The first one is that over the years, it has become part of the business model of the bank. It's really part of our DNA. And we develop a methodology based on this transition quality, these market outcomes that we aim to achieve. And we put together a sort of methodology to have an ex-ante assessment of this transition, this development effect. which also provide a system of incentives to maximize it. This bottom-up approach has been complemented by a country assessment. So we measure each country towards this transition journey, and this provides a sense of the narrative that we aim to build. The third element that I want to mention is that although a private sector institution comes with a number of challenges, development effectiveness brought a sense of strengthening the governance of the institution, and also to raise the attention about how important it is to develop a culture of result and a culture of evaluation in the arena. These are the key elements I would like to mention. Thank you. Back to you, Claudia.
Thanks, Gabriele, for sharing your efforts focused on this transition journey and very interesting methodology for the ex-ante evaluation, complemented with the country assessment and the strengthening of the governance and the culture of results. Rasmus, what can you tell us from your perspective from the World Bank Group?
So the World Bank has been quite a pioneer in many of these results and development effectiveness systems. The bedrock of this is a self-evaluation system that all investment projects go through, where teams self-evaluate the results using an objective-based methodology at the end. This has been in place since the 1960s. And by now we have a database of 11,334 projects that have been through this kind of assessment and that have ratings of effectiveness. So a massive database. It's used in academic research quite a bit, and that is these self-evaluations are validated by us in the independent evaluation group, and the validation part is really essential in terms of keeping the system honest. The system sort of, as was mentioned before, is part of the governance system. It's part of the bedrock of the sort of like the project cycle. It feeds up the reputation of the institutions, as in like being credible, in order to be seen as credible, we need to have these sort of things in place. And the system also feeds more aggregate information to corporate scorecards, corporate reporting on strategies and thematic things with ratings and other information that sort of aggregates up from these bedrock systems embedded into the lending projects. So this sort of elaborate system has been in place for a long time, and it's really part of maintaining the reputation of the institutions, which really helps when it's time for capital increases and replenishments, to go out and have credible systems overseen by independent evaluation functions. Back to you.
Thank you, Rasmus, for sharing these interesting insights on the World Bank self-evaluation system with such a broad database available for research, and also for highlighting, just like Gabriele, the importance of the governance arrangements. Now let's listen to Ove's take on the achievements from the IDB's perspective. Now to you, Cesar.
Thanks, Claudia, and thank you all for having me here. So first, I would like to quickly reiterate some of the things that I've already said. First, our system, which is the Development Effectiveness Framework, is turning 15 years this year, so we have to organize a quinceañera for it, as being a Latin American institution. The system combines a set of instruments, governance arrangements, and reporting mechanisms, basically to do two things. That's how the system was envisioned at the beginning. First, to do the right things in countries, which means having relevant interventions and choosing them with a strategic selectivity criteria. And second, doing things right, which means that these interventions need to be effective no, in reaching their development objectives. They need to be efficient and they need to be sustainable. So for this, the system deploys a set of instruments through the project cycle. So at entry, there is an instrument that measures the relevance of projects, their alignment with institutional priorities and with development country priorities. It measures the evaluability of the intervention. It measures project logic. It has an cost-benefit analysis. It measures that the intervention has adequate monitoring and evaluation elements and risk management. During implementation, there is an instrument that measures that the interventions are executed on time and that the products are being produced also on time and at adequate costs. And it's also supposed to monitor how the intervention is doing on outcome and projects. And finally, at closure, the system has a self-evaluation tool that measures if the intervention has been effective. And these self-evaluations from management are validated by Ovid. So what has worked with this instrument that is now a teenager? First, the bank has a comprehensive system that covers the entire project cycle. Second, the bank has much better information in all the aspects of its projects. It didn't have it 15 years ago, and this was noted as obvious one of the main issues when trying to assess development effectiveness of its interventions. Third, it looks like the design of projects have been improving over time because the instrument at entry gives a score on the evaluability of projects and how is their vertical logic, and that has been going up. Other area of success is that now projects are monitored much more carefully, and this monitoring has translated to better execution times, especially for investment loans, and has facilitated portfolio analysis at the country level. Also, thanks to the system, the results matrices of projects have improved a lot. So now we have results matrices that will allow us at closure to measure effectiveness rigorously. So that's another thing that we didn't have before. And finally, I think corporate reporting has improved also. So, and that's it. And I hopefully didn't take too much time. Thanks.
Thank you, Cesar. It's totally fine. Thank you for highlighting how the IDB works on doing the right things and doing things right. Thanks to all of our panelists for sharing their experiences on the advancements of development effectiveness system. It is interesting to see that even from different perspectives, there are similarities in the achievements in building a base of information for projects from design upon completion, and how the principles have guided our efforts on effectiveness. Now we're ready to move to our second question. What challenges still remain for development effectiveness systems? Why don't you go first, Rasmus?
Great question. So as I see, these systems produce ratings, and those ratings allow us to understand trends, where the portfolios are going, what's improving, what's worsening, and so on and so forth. And that's really valuable. But the ratings are not the same as outcomes. So understanding the outcomes of the projects is much harder than knowing their ratings according to a set methodology. So what do I mean? It's really frustrating for us that despite all these extensive systems, we often don't understand very well how is the World Bank Group contributing to changes on the ground in countries. To what extent can we say that improvements that we see in countries are because of Bank Group support, or that when things worsen, to what extent do we know whether the Bank Group made it less bad? It's often very little we can actually reliably say. And likewise, I'm not so sure that these systems contribute a whole lot to learning, as in especially sort of granular learning in teams, in sectors, on what works, why, under what circumstances, when should we try this approach, when should we try that approach, how should a certain project be changed, how should interventions in a sector sort of be altered over time. That kind of granular learning based on data, evidence, solid understanding it's not always there. And when we looked into it, we found out that it's not, people don't really use these systems because they don't find them all that useful. As in, like, maybe the information was not quite seen as being credible, of being quite strong enough. Back to you, Claudia.
Thank you, Rasmus, for highlighting the importance of ratings and for pointing out the importance of focusing on outcomes on the ground and the challenges of these systems. Now, let's see what the IDB has to add to these challenges. Cesar, please.
Thanks, Claudia. So what are the challenges that remain? First of all, the bank seems to be stagnated in not improving the development results of their interventions. No, we have been in a plateau for a few years now. So what could be driving this, and how does it relate to the system? First, I think there are issues with the governance of the system and the roles and responsibilities of the different actors. So the way that the system works in the bank is that the unit that originates and implements the projects is the one that applies all the set of instruments through the project cycle. No, and this is starting to create some problems. So I think there need to be some check and balances here, and maybe revising some of the procedures. Second, when the system was implemented in the IDB, there was a department that was clearly the champion of the system internally, besides the external actors like the Office of Evaluation. The role of this department as champion of the system, as defender of the system, I think has been eroding over time. So when you lose the champion internally, the system starts to falter, no? And you need really, these systems need a champion that helps project teams implement all of these instruments, and that also has a role of keeping them honest. Third, one thing that happened in the IDB is that the system, when it was implemented, responded to a culture that rewarded approvals and disbursements of loans rather than fulfilling of development outcomes. So the system had the ambition of changing that, changing the culture, but that has also not happened fully in our bank. And as many of you know, the IDB is El Banco Amigo, so it's a very flexible and it's very client oriented, which I think is a great thing. But sometimes when that flexibility involves reformulating or canceling loans, that can have impacts on the development effectiveness of the interventions and create tensions. A fourth point is that I think that the system in the bank has not been fully integrated with higher level strategies, especially at the sector level. The strategic framework at the sector level in the IDB is weak. It doesn't feed up from the system. No, the strategic framework at the country is a little better, but that is also creating tensions. And finally, the system, when it started, it was envisioned to cover all bank activities, which include technical assistance, finance with grants, and also knowledge generation. That was never implemented. So the development effectiveness framework for those type of interventions is still weak in the bank, and that's another area that needs to be worked on. Thanks, Claudia.
Thank you, Cesar, for highlighting the importance of checks and balances to make the system work, as well as its scope. And just like Rasmus also for highlighting these challenges in promoting learning, which seems to be something that we struggle with. So Gabriele, how is the situation at the EBRD? Are you facing similar challenges?
We actually face all these challenges plus many others. But no, I agree very much. I mean, not to repeat what Rasmus and Cesar already mentioned, but let me start maybe with a broader point that Rachel actually highlighted in her first intervention, that is about this development effectiveness agenda is more than a decade old. And we are questioning if has not kept pace with the change in demands on doing development, right? For example, one challenge is that definitely, especially for the EBRD portfolio, there is a need to adjust, to adapt this development effectiveness agenda in the context of multiple crises. Like, for example, the war on Ukraine, which has a huge impact in all our portfolio. But beyond that is also what Rasmus mentioned, the need to move and to look more at impact rather than just effectiveness, which means also look at indirect and induced result, right? So the result agenda in the sense of you know, the usual result chain has shown some limitation. When we build a road, we don't build a road for counting the number of kilometers and not even for counting the number of people with better access to transport. We look at the additional, you know, fostering additional wages, additional employment, fostering economic development. So there is a need definitely to look more at impact. And from an institution like EBRD, a private sector institution, we deliver more than 400 projects per year. There is also this balance about you know, the resources that you may need for strengthening the development effectiveness agenda, and also an institution which looks very much at the private sector. There is all this issue about you know, data collection, data monitoring, and data reporting, and the sensitivity of certain information related to private sector clients, right? And so all these challenges make really the case of opening the discussion across IFIs, across MDBs, how to rethink the whole development effectiveness agenda together. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriele, for pointing out the limitations of the results agenda. We need to do better at looking at impact on the ground, and also for highlighting how the focus of the private sector presents its own challenges. Now that we listened to our three panelists from international financial institutions, what is your take, Rachel, from the CGD?
Great, thanks, Claudia. And thanks to my colleagues. I've been furiously making notes, learning about your organization. So thank you. This has been really interesting. Okay, so earlier I highlighted the agreement to a common effectiveness principles as a clear achievement so far. However, while it's great that we have these principles, I think there have been and still are a lot of challenges related to their implementation. And this isn't new. In the latest monitoring report on the implementation of the effectiveness principles, which was published by the GPDC in 2019 and is based on results from the 2017 monitoring round, the results showed declining performance on several monitoring indicators, including the use of country-owned priority and results frameworks and measures of predictability. Findings from our survey also highlighted problems related to implementing the effectiveness agenda, with respondents noting that technical, strategic, and political barriers to implementation had limited the applicability of the principles in practice. So at the technical level, our respondents said that while the effectiveness principles are important guiding concepts, they faced challenges applying the principles in practice. And this was particularly true for actors using modalities other than ODA grants. And in particular, our respondents questioned how the principles should apply to private or blended finance. And they also raised questions about applying the principles in different country contexts, such as fragile states or middle-income countries. So what we heard then was that there was a demand from respondents for clearer guidance on how to operationalize the principles when using different instruments or when they're engaged in a variety of country contexts. At the strategic level, respondents expressed difficulties interpreting the principles in the context of the SDGs, essentially questioning what it means to be an effective development actor in the context of global challenges, which I think links well to what Gabriele was talking about with the multiple crises. So there's a lot to unpack here, but I think the broad issue is that there remain questions about how the effectiveness principles translate into activities that are designed to tackle, say, global as well as local development issues, and when agencies or development actors are expected to be responding to multiple issues at once. And then within this context, our respondents questioned whether the principles were nimble enough to provide guidance for activities focused on global challenges or for new development partnerships emerging in an SDG era. And then lastly, at the political level, our respondents really highlighted that waning interest from political leaders had weakened the agenda's implementation and reduced the institutional and individual incentives for staff to prioritize implementing effectiveness commitments. Basically, respondents said that at a time with so many competing demands, there was little appetite from leadership to devote time and resources to effectiveness over other more immediate concerns. So taken together then, I think what we took away from this exercise is that while there is support for the effectiveness agenda, there are still gaps that are hindering the ability for organizations to translate the principles into practice. And in my mind, I think this really remains a key challenge going forward. Back to you, Claudia.
Thank you, Rachel, for highlighting that while effectiveness principles are important, there are still challenges putting them in practice. So we have discussed so far the main achievements and challenges. We see common challenges regarding how to measure and achieve results on the ground, and basically how to implement these effectiveness principles in practice. Now it's time to look ahead and think about what can be done to improve development results. Are there any innovative approaches being considered to tackle these challenges? What can you tell us, Gabriele?
Let me start just by saying that in EBRD, the role of the independent evaluation is also been an innovative force in the institution. So we actually jump very much in this discussion of how to fix some of these challenges that we just mentioned. So I think that this role of an evaluation department as an innovator, it's very important. And we experiment a number of things. So One that we are actually working right now is about how we can embed in our IT platform a sort of more articulated theory of change, building this sort of narrative, at least, connecting the project outputs to the overarching transition impact of a project, how this project contributes towards the transition that is in the mandate of the bank. We experiment using modeling, both macro modeling and micro modeling, complexity modeling, about having a increase the selectivity and to have a better sense of the potential of a project. And from an evaluation perspective, also try to use new products or revamp old products in a new way. For example, in the context of the ECG, the Evaluation Cooperation Group, we are working on this real-time rapid assessment kind of evaluation, and how this can be complemented by impact or counterfactual analysis in order to get a broader picture of the overall development effectiveness. And also, in particular, in the green sphere, we are working on availability assessment to be sure that the institutions are well equipped with the instruments for measuring, for example, climate adaptation, all these new things. So there is a lot of space, and I think that, again, MDB, SAIFIs, and the think tank can really work together to identify suitable ways to strengthen the development effectiveness. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriele, for highlighting the role of independent evaluation in all you are doing at EBRD. What can you share with us, Rachel, from the CGD's perspective?
Sure, thanks, Claudia. So for me, this is actually a really tough question. But I guess to link back to the implementation challenges that I mentioned earlier, I do think there's been some progress, particularly to try and address the technical barriers to implementation. So I'm thinking specifically here of new guidances or supplementary sets of effectiveness principles that have been created in recent years to respond to specific needs. So for example, in, I think it was 2019, the GPDC launched the Kampala Principles for Effective Private Sector Engagement and an associated toolkit to provide tailored advice for how to apply the effectiveness principles to private sector partnerships. I understand that principles for, say, improved development impact in small island development states were also launched late last year. And the GPDC has also conducted some work on differentiated approaches to monitoring effectiveness in fragile contexts. So to the degree that these guidances provide more practical advice for implementing effectiveness principles across instruments and contexts, then they certainly provide a potential resource for overcoming technical barriers. On the strategic and political challenges, these are far more difficult to address. I think on questions around what it means to be effective in the SDG era and when providing global public goods, I don't think we have an answer to this yet, but there does seem to be quite a bit of new research emerging on this. So I know, for instance, the OECD put out a working paper on global public goods recently that touches on the implications for effectiveness. And I'm aware of colleagues at CGD and elsewhere working on similar issues. So I don't think we have an innovative solution yet, but I think the wheels are in motion. And then on the political barriers to implementation, this is obviously very difficult, but I do wonder if part of the challenge kind of relates to what some of my colleagues talked about earlier, which is that we don't really have good evidence on the relationship between the effectiveness principles and development impact, which makes it really difficult to develop a narrative that shows leaders why this agenda is so important, even alongside other competing demands. So in fact, there's a paper published a few months ago by the UNU Wider, which makes this point. The authors basically showed that the relationship between adherence to development effectiveness principles and development outcomes is tenuous, but they clarified that this is because of a lack of data rather than because of evidence of a negative relationship. Anyway, so all this is to say that while I don't think we have a solution to the political problem, working to perhaps build better evidence on effectiveness could help generate more interest from those with the ability to make it a priority within their institutions. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Very interesting, Rachel, that you highlighted all of this progress on global public goods and the fact that still more evidence is needed in this area between the principles and how they materialize into development outcomes. Cesar, do you know of any innovative approaches being used to improve development effectiveness?
Well, maybe I'll focus on an easier question, which is innovative approaches to improve the systems that we to development effectiveness in the long run. So first of all, I think one of the issues that we are facing in the IDB is that these systems are costly. No, they absorb a lot of resources from project teams, from other internal departments, and for us, for the Office of Evaluation, which is part of the system. So in that sense, I think now there are a lot of opportunities with artificial intelligence and large language models to help reduce some of these costs by having like virtual assistants that help evaluators, self-evaluators, project teams that are in charge of monitoring or that have to assess quality at entry of interventions. No, OVE is organizing another session on this topic during the week, so I encourage you to attend. This is a little commercial. But this will also help, for example, with what I was talking before about reducing the costs of having an internal champion helping project teams. No, I think one of the issues in the IDB is that the internal champion for this, it's resource constrained. No, so it cannot fulfill its role sometimes because of lack of resources. Second, if we aim to increase the scope of the development effectiveness systems to the areas that are not covered now, which are technical assistance and knowledge generation, AI and these LLM models can help doing that much more efficiently and under much lower costs, no? Which was a big barrier to entry to apply a complex system to those products. Finally, the IDB has this big challenge of changing the culture. So changing the culture from approvals and disbursements to achieving development objectives. So the other area here that it's a new area that maybe can help is all the area of behavioral economics, no, and trying to maybe develop nudges and apply modern research on how can we motivate this change in culture. And I stop here, Claudia. Thanks.
Thank you, Cesar, for bringing your perspective on how to improve the system. Rasmus, what can you add?
Well, so like other people from the Independent Evaluation Group, we've been pushing changes to the systems at the margin. We work with operations continuously to help them understand these systems, the self-evaluation systems, how they work. We try to offer a friendly face, be available, be responsive to feedback, comments, and so on. A lot is in how you operate systems, right? It's the human touch. You can improve a lot of things there. We also work from our side to extract information, evidence from systems. We produce shorter notes, more learning-oriented notes based on our data, based on data that's ultimately grounded in these systems, to showcase operational teams what the systems can do, the amount of value that's in there. They could often extract such information and learn lessons themselves. It's available to everybody. Yet somehow we in the independent evaluation function, we are de facto the champions and have the access and the expertise to extract all this information. And so we produce a number of learning-oriented notes and synthesis documents and what have you, to really show people the value. But overall, at the level of how the systems are designed and operated, there's an enormous inertia. I'm not sure that I'm seeing very much innovation. The innovation that's there happens very slowly. These are systems that are maybe 47 years old in the World Bank, and even for the IFC, the private sector, go back many decades in their current form. And these systems are deeply embedded and are hard to change. So I very much agree with Cesar that there's so much scope for making things more user-friendly, more intuitive, use technology and so on. But to really roll out those sort of solutions, maybe the systems would need to be rethought, redesigned. And that's just really, really hard when systems have been in place for decades. Whenever somebody sort of brings up a proposal, why don't we change this? Why don't we change that? Immediately you have somebody else saying, well, that's not quite how we do things. That would leave out this criterion or this rating or this piece of information. So the inertia makes it really hard to fundamentally rethink the systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Rasmus, for pointing out the need to rethink these systems. We have a hard task. Thanks to our panelists for sharing their insights on achievements, challenges, and innovations and how to improve development effectiveness systems. We have seen that these systems have built a base of information and ratings, but there is still insufficient clarity on the connection from that base of information and development results, and also challenges with the checks and balances and how to move away from the inertia of these systems. This is certainly food for thought for improving our development effectiveness systems. We are moving now to the final section of our event, where we can discuss some questions from the audience. Please leave us your questions in the chat, and our team will be selecting a few questions for the panelists. I think we already have one question, so I'm going to read it. Okay, this question is from Michael Potter, and it says, I find very interesting that ultimately the limitations of such results and learning systems remain the same and are still very hard to overcome. Do you think that artificial intelligence could be a useful tool to, one, bridge the gap towards better tracking of results, and two, strengthen the link between field level knowledge and institutional strategic learning? It's a hard question. Who would like to take a first round? Cesar, I think you want to take it.
Okay, I'll try. So yes, I think the potential is really there. No, these systems, LLMs, and there are some agencies that have already developed some of these tools to try to extract information from the very rich evidence that they have. Now, the AREA system from UNDP is an example. I think if you haven't seen it, no, and this will fill one of the gaps that we are having now, which is, for example, in the IDB, we have now probably 300 to 400 self-evaluations of completed projects, no? With a bunch of lessons learned from each project. And now the big challenge is how to aggregate that and how to create a friendly assistant that can help projects when they need evidence on particular topics. And I think the artificial intelligence and LLM models are right there to help. Of course, there have many limitations. They are new, but I think here in OVE, and I believe in other institutions, we are starting to pilot, know how can we use them reliably in order to help us extract lessons learned and be much more user-friendly. So rather than having some reports on collections of self-assessments of projects, we can have as the dynamic tool that will try to answer some questions based on the knowledge already generated in the institutions. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much, Cesar. I'm not sure if someone else, Rasmus or Gabriele or Rachel, would like to add something.
Sure. Everybody seems to be talking about artificial intelligence these days. It's amazing how that topic comes in any and all conversations that all of a sudden. And we are in IT already using artificial intelligence, but at the tail end, as in extracting lessons, aggregating, identifying across projects what are some common sort of obstacles, that sort of thing. I've yet to see artificial intelligence that really helps teams fill out self-evaluation information, learn in real time, have a user-friendly tool to actually manage projects, to have better dialogues with country counterparts and clients. That would perhaps be more revolutionary than putting it at the hands of people like us. But maybe doing that would require some sort of rethinking of the systems and the requirements that we put on operational teams.
Thank you, Rasmus. Unless Gabriele or Rachel wants to add something, I can move to the next question. Okay, I'll move to the next question then. I have a question from Veronique Sals. She is the director of the evaluation department of the EBRD. And she said that in line with their business in EBRD, they often hear from management that when working with the private sector, data is very difficult to collect, and that requesting more data to measure effectiveness would become a burden for them. What has been your experience? Maybe Rasmus, if you would like to start.
Let me pass on this one.
Okay. Cesar, do you want to add something?
Well, I think the sovereign guarantee versus non-sovereign guarantee systems, they have common similarities, but they have some issues. Here in the IDB, sometimes when the non-sovereign guarantee, meaning a private sector loan, is closed, sometimes it's more difficult to engage with clients. So that can create some problem getting information from former clients and things like that. So timing is very important. And then you have some much more prepayments than in the private, with public sector projects. So once a project is prepaid and it's out of supervision, then you miss that. Paradoxically, though, in the IDB, there seems to be more information for non-sovereign guarantee loans, private sector loans, than sovereign guarantee loans. So I think even though there are problems reaching up with clients, there seems to have better monitoring and evaluation systems in place for outcomes. The thing that we need to say, though, is that many times the outcome indicators and the information needs for sovereign guarantees operations are much more complex than private sector.
Thanks so much, Cesar. I would like to read now one question from Raul Arguello or Arguello. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. We are translating now. I believe that the actors, and specifically the countries, should be much more aware of the importance of the development effectiveness system, and not only to complete a requirement of the financial institutions. This should include training for the actors and unification of indicators and measurements to make a valid statistical comparison. What do you think from this perspective, more for the countries from the executing agencies? Who would like to start?
Yeah, I can come in here. So if I'm not mistaken, the Busan Declaration of Development Effectiveness talks about the importance of country ownership and country leadership in this agenda. Now, these systems, we are talking about the MDB owned systems, MDB run systems. These systems collect data for MDBs for our purposes, not for the country's purposes. The countries might have their own monitoring and evaluation systems that many times our projects do not use. So let's be quite clear that the ownership, buy-in, participation of the countries, it's there because they have to. It's sort of like a requirement. Many times they have to hire many specialists using borrowed project funds in order to comply with requirements that we in the MDBs impose on them. So I think that if I understand the question correct, I think the need goes much beyond capacity building in terms of having countries use this data. It's much beyond. The real need is to develop country systems, strengthen country systems, and then use those. And even if that means maybe adjusting our own requirements, maybe not insisting on uniformity. The MDBs insist on uniformity, right? The template is the same for all projects, for all countries. Once we switch to country systems, we would have to work with whatever that country produces. Therefore, the data may not be homogeneous across systems and across countries and sectors anymore. Right? But it's so much better. That doesn't look good for the MDB, but it's much better for the country. If they don't have to feed all the donors using different templates in different databases, if the countries can just have one M&E system in their sector, that's much better for them. But that requires quite a change in mindset on behalf of the MDBs. And I'm not seeing that happening. If anything, we're going in the wrong direction, imposing ever more requirements on our side. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Rasmus. I'm not sure if Gabriele or Rachel or Cesar want to add something.
Just very quickly, I fully second what Rasmus said. There is a big incentive problem here, and no, I think MDBs and other development agencies need to work on development country system, developing a set of administrative indicators that can feed all of these projects. And what we see in reality is that many projects rely on special surveys or things like that to collect indicators, and these are financed with loan funds. Many times countries really don't want to spend that money, and then we end up in a very worse outcome in which we don't even have the data to measure results. So this is a big incentive problem that needs to be addressed holistically.
May I just jump in with one quick addition, if that's okay? Sorry, just to say I fully agree with everything that everybody said, but my understanding is that the GPEDC has actually recently gone through an exercise where they're really trying quite actively to bring the development effectiveness agenda to the country level. And so they've revised their monitoring round and the way that they think about effectiveness to do that, exactly what's being said. So just, I think we still have to wait and see how it goes as they're starting to implement the next monitoring round now. But I do think that there's been a push to try and really bring this agenda to the countries. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Okay, so I have another question from Luisa. Do you think that for having a cultural transformation, incentives focus on development results, we should also include the government that we support in a strategy to address current challenges in terms of development effectiveness? Rachel gave us some insights, but maybe the other panelists could share their ideas too. I think I'm going to read it again. Do you think that for having a cultural transformation, we should also include the governments that we support in a strategy to address current challenges in terms of development effectiveness?
Yes, of course. Development is obviously created by the countries themselves. The development organizations, we are there to help, support, nudge, provide financing, provide knowledge, but ultimately change happens in the countries, for the countries, and because of people's efforts. And there are so many ways in which to try to strengthen a culture of development results in countries. First and foremost is that we need to invest in the evaluation and monitoring capacities of these countries, so that they have the data, the evidence, and the ability to use that information to inform decision making. Efforts are underway, but are sometimes slow going and very much depend on the sort of political will of countries. And I think as development organizations, we have a lot we can do and should do to nudge that along, among other things, just to be role models, as in, here is data, here's evidence, and showing them how that data and evidence can be useful in decision making, right? Not just extracting data and using it for our own reports, but using data and evidence in dialogue with counterparts, demonstrating the value of it. Thank you.
Claudia, if I may add one point, it's about first of all also working MDBs, IFI as a system. So not doing individual effort. The World Bank group goes there, EBRD does something else. It's pointed to work really as a system. And that would be the first step towards empowering country, even for M&E purposes. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gabriele. Anybody else wants to add something? Okay. I'm going to move to our next question from Tatiana. I know it might be a little bit difficult, but let's try it. If you could provide 2 key messages about development effectiveness to teams monitoring projects aimed at tackling the challenges of inertia by both internal and country leaders, limited data and evidence, what would they be?
If I can go first again, my one advice would be to teams, use the data and evidence. Don't just collect it. Don't just report it. Use it. Use it in your thinking. Use it in your team meetings. Use it in your meetings with clients, with counterparts. You put that data on the table. Have discussions. What does it show us? Where are we doing well? Where are we falling behind? What needs to change? Just reflect on the data. Reflect on it constantly. Then that will lead to conversations. How can we improve the data? Then other people will start catching on to that and will have ideas, suggestions, will tell you things you don't know. That's the power of data, right? But you have to use it. You have to constantly reflect on it, learn from it.
Thank you, Rasmus. And so important to not just comply with the systems, but use them. Someone else wants to add key messages?
Yes, just very quickly, these tools are very useful. If you look at them as a burden or as another reporting requirement, you are missing a huge opportunity. First, on the usefulness of the instruments at entry to help you design your intervention, to make sure that it has a very strong logical framework, that it assesses the risks that your intervention is going to face. And then, as Rasmus pointed out, during implementation, it's a great management tool to change the things that are not working, see where are the bottlenecks. And finally, at closure, they are one of the biggest learning tools that we have, both at the country level and for a specific region or a sector. So stop looking at them as an imposition from the ADB on extra reporting things, and rather use them as a management tool.
Thank you, Cesar. I think we also have like a shared task on how to make these systems useful, right? I'm not sure if Rachel or Gabriele want to add something. And if not, I would like to give the floor to Ivory Young Protzel, because we are in a special moment now, and she would like to share this with us.
Yes, thank you, Claudia. In fact, the discussion has been super interesting, and really thank to all the panelists. And it's very clear, I think, for us, for all of us, how difficult it is to, on the one hand, to achieve results, which is our primary objective, but also to have a system in our IFIs, a system that both works and is not too burdensome. So it's not too heavy, neither for the institution or the clients. And I think several of you have referred to that, especially Cesar and Rasmus. And I was thinking that, yes, it's true. It's very difficult to change systems because they are so old that they are so much ingrained within the institution and the way we work. And change, we've seen it so many times, it's so difficult on those institutions. So true, but there I'd like to mention two things. One is that we still need those systems. We need to change them, and it's difficult, but we need them. We need them because they give us, when they work more or less, they give us the accountability that we need, and we're still working on it, but they will give us, they should give us learning as well. That's what, Ramu, you were saying, use the information, use the evidence, and that's a part of the learning. And I agree that we still have progress to do, but let's be careful and not throw the baby with the water bath. So yes, we need to change them. Let's not throw the system through the window. That's one aspect. The other is, I'd like to mention something that I find extremely important for IDB. And I think it's a note of optimism on my side. And is that we're really on a very special moment. So I think that a special moment will allow us to be more ambitious and not only think of changes on the margin. And why this is a special moment? We have a new president after an institutional crisis that lasted 1-2 years. We have a new president, and he's been very outspoken about the fundamental importance of delivering on results. And he's spoken about that every time that he has set out his priorities. He's mentioned that to the press even before taking possession of the position. He's mentioned that to the governors of the bank, and he's very committed on all what we know, and that's already changing the conversation. We know that the tone from the top is extremely important. And I think we have a new president that is committed. Certainly the task will not be easy. And OVE, as many other departments, are there to support the change. But that's one aspect. The other is that IDB is due to have a new institutional strategy. And that's also an opportunity, because that means that with both elements, what we have is an opportunity to have significant changes and not just on the margin. So OVE is starting an evaluation on the development effectiveness framework, and our aim, and Claudia and Cesar are working on this evaluation, and they probably will come back to you for further insights. But our aim is precisely that, not just to find the little recommendations to improve the system here or there, but how we really can contribute to shift the focus of the institution and have something that works better. So I think we have the stars aligned, at least at the IDB, and I think everyone on the institution is very excited with that and really committed to work for it. So that's the only thing I wanted to mention, because I know it's difficult. I know with institutions have had many weaknesses and have made it very difficult to change. But I think that here we have an opportunity, and I wanted to share a positive note as well. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Ivory, also for giving us this context and motivation to keep improving our system that, of course, are important. So now the event is coming to an end, and it has been a delightful opportunity to exchange perspectives on development effectiveness and think about how we can improve. I hope this event has contributed to nurturing the debate on how to improve development effectiveness systems and results on the ground. I want to thank Ivory for her welcoming remarks and all the panelists for this lively exchange. I also want to thank OVE's communication team. If you can please turn on your camera. Cristina Gonzalez, communication specialist, Emir Salim and Omar Sandoval, OVE consultants, and the team conducting the evaluation on development effectiveness, Luisa Riveros, Clarissa Yerovi, and Lucero Vargas for making this event possible. Biggest thanks to the audience for joining us. Stay tuned to OVE's social media outlets for more on development effectiveness and evaluation. Have a good day, everybody.